Guys class, this is Miss O'Neill and we are looking at our proportions lesson for today. This is going to be introducing the idea of what a proportion is and also how we are going to be using them for our math content. So just a little recall, a proportion is a mathematical statement that has two ratios or rates that are set equal to each other. And our first example that we see is 4/3 is equal to 24/18. When you first look at this statement, you're going to say, no, absolutely not. 4/3 and 24/18 is not the same thing. But much like what you have been experiencing with you changing percents into decimals or decimals into percents, we can manipulate or modify specific kinds of things that we are given so that way they are still equal, but they look different. So going back to middle school, you are going to be doing cross multiplication, or sometimes it's been called the butterfly method or the X method. It depends on how you were taught it. But the idea is if I am given two fractions, they can be considered proportion by doing cross multiplication. I can say that 4 times 18, that's right here, better equal 3 times 24. That's right there. And if I take the time to put 4 times 18 into my calculator, we get out 72. 3 times 24 is also 72. The moment that those two pieces of information equal each other when we cross multiply, we know for sure that these are a proportion. So let's put that into some practice for our examples 1 through 3. It wants us to determine whether the proportion is true, meaning they are equal to each other, just like what we saw up here, or false, they are not. And the way we check that is the cross product or cross multiplication rule. So our first example would be 13 going across the equal sign to the 56, and we also have 7 to the 104. And that idea of product is another way of saying to multiply or times. So we're going to utilize our calculators. Let me bring mine up because I forgot. Here we go. Being slow today, I guess. We're going to utilize the very first one, 13 times 56. And you could have also did 56 times 13. It doesn't matter which number you put into the calculator first. What matters is that you're always going to be crossing the equal sign to multiply. You wouldn't go directly sideways, okay? So 13 times 56 is 728. If this is a true proportion, we should be able to do 7 times 104, and it should equal the same exact thing we just got. And when it does, we can say true. So on here, we can say 728. Let me make this a little bit smaller. 728 equals 728. And that is true. So our first example was a true proportion. These are the same fraction. They're just changed slightly. In the way that they appear. Sometimes you might want to make a fraction become larger. Think about recipes. If I'm cooking for more people, I might have to double the recipe. If you're cooking for yourself and not a lot of people are going to be around, you might have to half the recipe, make it smaller. In our second example, we have 30 miles over 35 days is set equal to 18 miles over 42 days. And so we're going to think about this idea of cross multiplication. We have our 30 and we're going across to the 42, 35, and across to the 18. So when you're setting this up to be able to put it into your calculator, what you're going to want to get in the habit of is writing out what exactly is the math that you're seeing. So I have this 30, and if I want to times it, I'm going to use a parenthesis to show multiplication because I don't want to use the letter X, and you'll see why in a moment. So we have 30. And across from it is 42. So we're going to do 30 times 42, and that should equal 35 times 18. So again, I can see the 30 and the 42 being put together through multiplication, and I can also see that 35 and 18 are being put together through multiplication. And so we're going to do one side at a time. In our first one, we're doing 30 times 42. So 30 times 42 gives us out 1,260. And that should equal the other side, which is 35 times 18. So if we do 35 times 18, I get out 630. And if I'm looking at these two, I'm going to say absolutely not. These are not equal. So we can put a line through the equal sign to show not equal. Because they are not equal, this entire statement is going to be false. They are not a proportion. They actually have no relationship to each other at all. And then we're going to move on to the next one. Again, when you're working with your proportions, you're going to always be utilizing cross multiplication. We have 1,000 times 3, and we have 75 times the 40. And when we're setting this up to write it out, I always start with my top, and then I work my way to the bottom part of the fraction, just to kind of organize myself and make sure that I'm not forgetting pieces. So this top part is 75, and if I go across the equal sign, I'm multiplying it by 40. This should equal 1,000 times, jumping across, 3. So, putting it into our calculators, our very first one is going to be 75 times 40, 75. And you can also, if you have parentheses, use parentheses to show multiplication, or you could just use the times button. And that gives us out 3,000. If we do 1,000 times 3, you will also get 3,000. Because these are two equal numbers, this statement is true. Yes, these are two equal fractions. So the reason for being able to use cross multiplication is a couple of reasons. One, it could check to see if my math is accurate. And two, it can help us with the following questions that we see below. In each one of these proportions, we are left with something called a variable. That is this letter X that is randomly thrown into each one of these questions. And a variable, for those of you that may not be familiar with it, let me just kind of put a side note on there. Variable stands for a letter that represents an unknown number. And that's going to be something that you will hear throughout of the school year. So a variable is an unknown number, and we use a letter to kind of just hold its spot there. Usually what we are used to is using zeros as placeholders, but that's not going to work for us here. When we are trying to pretend like a number is not there, or trying to figure out what the number is secretly, we use the letter to hold its spot, and our goal is to find out what that actual value is. And the way that we do it is exactly like what we did on the previous examples. We're cross multiplying. So 70 is still going to be multiplied by 21, and this letter X will be multiplied by 15. When I am working with these kinds of problems, the thing I like to do first is look at the cross multiplication that contains the letter. I always like to have that written first. When I'm doing a letter times a number, my calculator doesn't know what that is, and we don't know what that is, because again, the letter is supposed to be something that is unknown. So we will always put the number first, and then the letter goes behind it. So x times 15 is just simply 15x. Set an equal sign. On the other side, we have 70 and 21. Again, we're multiplying these. So I can put in my calculator 70 times 21, and I get out 1,470. 1,470. And here's what we are left with. Right now, I can't look at this and say this is a true statement or a false statement because I'm stuck with the letter X. And so we need to think about the idea of, well, how do I go about getting this letter X alone so I can figure out what exactly we know is the value of X? And this is going to go right back to the idea of if you multiplied to put them together, the opposite of multiplication is division. So we are going to divide both sides by the number that we want to get rid of next to x. And in this case, it is the 15. So both sides will be divided by 15. Going back to simple equations, these 15s will cancel out because 15 divided by 15 is 1. It's almost like it's invisible now. And what we are left with is this letter x equals, and to figure out this final answer, we're going to be doing 1,470 divided by 15. And that gives us out 98. So my answer for this example will be x equals 98. And this process does not change. No matter what kind of fractions I'm given, it will always be the same exact method. We will be using cross multiplication to get the fractions to go away, so that way I can actually be able to do a little bit more of math. And I always like to use the letter first. So 6 and x have to be multiplied together. That's just simply 6x equals 14 times 15. So we have 14 times 15 is 210. Don't freeze up on me now. 210. In order for me to go and get x alone, I will divide both sides by 6. Remember, you're always going to divide by the number that you want to cross off that's next to x. So these are gone now, and I'm left with x is going to equal 210 divided by 6. Big thing I want you guys to remember here is whatever you see on top of the fraction, and in this case it's 210, should be the very first thing you put into your calculator. Don't reverse the fraction. So we have x equals 35. Oops, that's supposed to be 5. All right, last example here is trying to trick you a little bit. I'm giving you some decimals. Doesn't make a difference. Still doing the same exact process. We are using cross multiplication to be able to get this going. And the very first thing I see is that my letter x is being multiplied by 1.6. So we will write 1.6 and put the x behind it. Simply write the number first, the letter goes after. And that's supposed to equal 0.9 times 0.5. So 0.9 times 0.5 gives me out 0.45. 0.45. And if I'm using my method of solving an equation, I will divide both sides by the value that I want to remove away from x, which in this case will be 1.6. We see these crossing off, and we're left with x equals into my calculator. And this is the part that I wanted to make sure that I brought up to you. We are so used to putting the bigger number on top of our fractions. Not in this case. I see the 0.45 first. I'm putting it into my calculator first. Divided by 1.6 gives me out 0.28125. So we can say 0.28125. And that will be our answer for that question. Cross multiplication. You are first trying to get the fractions to go away by using cross multiplication to remove them out of the fraction form. If there is a letter remaining, you must divide by the number next to the letter to get the letter alone. You're going to use the same method to answer the next few questions on your practice sheet. So please make sure to take your time, double check your math, and use your calculators to make sure that your math is accurate. Good luck!